You have to be honest about what your resources can do.
Cybersecurity is a bit like a real-life tactical game. 1 minute you're blocking, the next discovering all sorts of bugs and glitches. Joining me is Giles Thornton, Head of Information Security at the Premier League.
I've seen teams where the drive for compliance is so strong that it becomes demoralizing.
Cybersecurity is a bit like a real-life tactical game. 1 minute you're blocking, the next discovering all sorts of bugs and glitches, downloading the next patch update, and hoping the next error message doesn't lose all progress. In today's episode, we've got the cheat code. We're talking about why firefighting isn't a winning cybersecurity strategy, especially when you're short on time, tools, and people. And who better to talk about this high-pressured game other than someone who's in the thick of it? Joining me is Giles Thornton, Head of Information Security at the Premier League. Welcome to the podcast, Giles.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So let's talk about this constant state of alert that so many cybersecurity teams live in. It all seems quite reactive. What's your take on this culture?
Security engenders a constant drive for improvement. Everyone talks about continuous improvement. So as a result, no one's ever really satisfied. So there's a culture just endemic in security where we've always got to do better. There's always another control. You could always minimize the risk a bit more. And the debate that any security professional will have, I think, is how much security is enough security. And I think the business will always say you've got plenty of security. The practitioner is always going to say there's not enough. And that balance is always going to create that friction. And the stress lands with the security team, right?
How many breaches are due to the lack of strategy, do you think?
So I flick-flack, to be honest, between the human aspect of most breaches. There's when you look at recent breaches with large organizations around ransomware, there's always a human element to it. And can you strategically eradicate a human element? When we talk about it's a constant tactical game, the tactical player can always have a strategic impact. So it's very hard to foresee that impact from 1,000 feet when that person is down in the weeds just doing what the business needs to do. On the other hand, do many organizations have a coherent security strategy? I'd argue not that many. And seeing the worth in it or the value as a business is probably quite difficult. If you have limited resources and one of your key resources says, I'd like to take 6 weeks just as a tactical pause whilst I think about what our strategy is going to be for the next 5 years, it's quite a big ask of a business when they just want to keep the lights on and keep pressing ahead. So probably the answer is a lot of breaches could be mitigated by a security strategy, but realistically, people don't have that tactical pause and the time to go away and do the planning.
Do you think that maybe we're overcomplicating the security aspects, and that's why it comes across that the 6 weeks, asking for that 6 weeks for a much longer return is not always taken on board, and that creates that very much reactive culture that we were just talking about?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. I think I'm very much of the opinion that a lot of security teams let perfect be the enemy of good. I subscribe to the idea that the security is quite often a game of not being the slowest person in the race. Just start running and doing some security puts you ahead of the vast majority of others who are going to be the low-hanging fruit for an attacker. And then obviously that argument doesn't stand up as you become a bigger organization, you're higher profile. But at the same time, if you never start, you're never going to make any progress at all. So doing the simple things well to start with, A, builds confidence in the business, but B, just pulls that bar up behind you. If you're not reading that tick list and you're not able to say, either I've done it or I'm not doing it, but I know what I'm doing about it, then you don't really need to be going anywhere else.
I'm really pleased you put up tick lists. Compliance tick lists and checklists can sometimes rule the roost. And override the strategic risk management. How does that have an impact on the team, the business?
Yeah. It's again, I come at this from two perspectives, but if you are trying to start from a blank sheet and you don't necessarily know what you're doing, a tick list is great. But as I think you correctly point out, they're enormously flawed at the same time, because if you don't know what you're doing and you're just given a high level framework and say, comply with this, what you're achieving is compliance, not security. And you shouldn't conflate the two. Compliance has its own function and is a purpose and exists for a reason. But thinking that you have effectively applied risk management because you've complied with a tick list is not the same thing. And I've seen teams where the drive for compliance is so strong that it becomes demoralizing, because the people involved know that they're not achieving the outcome, strategic or tactical, that the business really desires. Making people maintain 100% rates for compliance purposes is a way for burnout. It's a quick route to burnout for IT ops, for security, and the business hate it because there's no why behind it to help them understand what you're trying to achieve.
You mentioned burnout there. Do you think burnout contributes to some of the skills gaps that we see within the industry?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And I think at the minute, across the industry, we're also seeing a big what's next question next to that. People thrash themselves to become CISO of this or that, the other, and they're really, top dollar jobs where people have achieved a massive amount, and it's a real lifetime achievement for your career. But then what? Are you going to be CISO in that pressure cooker environment for 10, 15 years? Probably not.
So we talked a little bit at the beginning about constantly firefighting, and that must be extremely frustrating. And you've talked about some of the burnout already, and that can have. How can people move from survival mode to a more proactive approach? And what's the benefit?
My honest answer is brutal prioritization, and not just on your own. You have to bring everyone else along with that journey. You have to be honest about what your resources can do. So many people covering security as a functional working in security are available 24/7 on their phone whilst they're on holiday, whatever they're doing, because the world can't survive without them. That's not a fair approach. And there's an honest conversation to be had there about expectations and where you can get to in a reasonable amount of time. But you then need the business and realistically quite executive level buy-in to say, look, I'm not going to deal with the bottom pile of risk. If we prioritize like this, agree with my methodology, that means I'm going to do priority one first, and it's these two tasks. I don't have capacity to do anything else, or we'll have delays whilst I deal with those fires that come up, but I can't juggle everything. Or you can pay for some consultancy, or you can throw more effort at it. But I think my caution there is just buying outside resource that doesn't provide a long-term function for you realistically is just a problem you're pushing down the line for future you to pick up and be slightly overwhelmed with later.
Talking a little bit about resources, do you think that automation tools can help with a kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, to a certain extent. It's something I've definitely lent into. It helps to reduce the noise in a big way. Where there are things that can be securely automated and handed off to a machine or augmented with automation, I've definitely seen as a very successful way of making life a lot easier around things like any form of security operations function. It doesn't eradicate the need for human input. I really don't subscribe to the idea that AI is out for people's jobs at the minute. I've seen it do some amazing stuff, but the problem is people don't trust it yet.
Trust is a big part in the cyber landscape, isn't it? Really, it's the foundation of a lot of what we do, especially around securing our transactions and the data. You have to put a lot of trust in the companies you're working with, but also the systems. and each other within the organization. It comes back to that point you were talking about earlier about how you kind of need to trust the team to do and pull on their expertise and not just kind of rely or over rely on those systems. So we talked earlier about tactical and going from survival to the proactive. If our listeners were to go to their CISOs tomorrow or their board, if they are a CISO, what should they be taking? What should they be asking for that can make the biggest difference?
They should take a big list of so what's. And by so what's, I mean, take your cyber risks of that server that's in a back room that no one talks about, that's secretly keeping the business running, that you can't patch because no one remembers what it does or how it works anyway, and maybe you've lost the password. And explain why it costs a completely disproportionate amount of money to fix that problem and what problem it makes go away. So what if that server falls over? So what if this risk comes to fruition? In business terms, do a bit of consultancy 5 whys on yourself and go, well, why would that matter? Why? And if you have to go and speak to people in the business and say, what would happen if that software disappeared for X amount of time? It's a really useful conversation.
Let's put this into practice if we can, if that's all right. What can IT teams do to take a proactive approach to industry shifts? So the example I'm thinking of is the SSL TLS certificate validity decreasing to 47 days.
In that example, you have to lean into it. And interestingly, you brought up automation earlier. You're going to have to find a way to automate that stuff, because I can only imagine how quickly our IT team would burn out if I just left that to be a manual process here. And I'd always encourage people to think outside the box in that instance. Is there a service you can take? Can you make it someone else's problem who's an expert? Yeah, practically moving onto the front foot quite often means taking a small amount of operational risk, or I say small, sometimes it's a lot larger, when the business may not be comfortable with, but you have to take a bit of a leap and say, we're going to do a hard cutover at this point. And it's a hard sell. You're doing a bit of an internal sales job at that point. But yes, when you're talking about that pace of operations, and similarly, when you think about the pace of patching required now, the pace of vulnerability management, it's the same thing. That kind of cyber hygiene, which certificate rotation realistically is, you're going to have to start automating this stuff and trusting in the automation, but also then have robust plans for when it goes wrong, and be resilient around it.
So 47 days is one concern that you'll have right now. Do you have any other concerns at the moment?
Honestly, I think everyone looking at the sort of scattered spider activity is seeing that as an issue. As I mentioned, the human element in the loop is always a concern to me. I think I'm interested to see where AI governance goes. I heard an interesting opinion the other day that AI hasn't been around long enough for security tools to really manage it properly, because no one's got the expertise or figured out how to abuse it sufficiently to know what we're trying to stop people doing. So enormously exciting. The capabilities it's giving people, businesses, incredible. But at the same time, I think there are some surprises to come with that. I think that's the unknown, or the known unknown, whichever one you prefer.
You mentioned the human element a couple of times. How do you approach that? Do you do internal education around the importance of cybersecurity and the credentials?
I try to link this back to your question about compliance. Actually, is compliance-based training is all well and good if you want to turn around to someone after the fact and say, "Well, we told you so," but it doesn't proactively prevent anything happening. So, in the spirit of how to become more proactive about life, I'm leaning into nudge theory very heavily at the minute. And how do you give people tiny, tiny pieces of training that just gently prompt them to not do the wrong things, and also how do they do the right things. And when people learn how to do things within the parameters you've set up for security, and they stop bumping up against the edges and use the system that's there, their life becomes a lot better in terms of user experience and across IT in general as well. So, massively look at internal training, but trying to keep it specific. Is there a use case? Are we talking about a specific piece of technology? Are we talking about a specific business case? Who are the audience? Are the developers? Are they the finance team? What are they interested in? And then keeping it as brief as physically possible.
So very much bite-sized chunks.
Definitely.
Giles, what is the common cybersecurity myth that you feel like is actually holding teams back?
There seems to be an assumption, and whether it's within security or perhaps outside security, that cyber is dealt with. Have you dealt with that cyber problem? And that myth that you can make any risk go away entirely is super unhelpful. I had a great presentation where they just boiled it down to the fact that you can deal with the likelihood or you can deal with the impact, but the likelihood's probably beyond your control. You can make it harder and sort of reduce the likelihood that way. But actually, the thing that's fully within your control is the impact of a risk being realised at some sort of event.
And that's where the proactive approach comes in. You can then control what you can control and what you can foresee. And once you've got those elements established, it leaves you a much less stressful environment to deal with the things you need to react to rather than constantly reacting.
Yeah, that's a great summary. Exactly.
At the end of our episodes, we like to ask our guests, what is the one piece of tech that you could not live without and why?
So, weirdly, as I'm fidgeting with them now, my AirPods, I probably use them for absolutely everything. I'm plugged into anything constantly. But at the same time, potentially my son's iPad is up there as a lifesaver.
That is all we have time for today. Thank you, Giles, for taking the time to join us on the podcast. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. This has been Trusted Talk. Until next time.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you for tuning into Trusted Talk, the digital certificate and identity security podcast. Today's episode wasn't just about information, it was about arming you with the knowledge to make critical security decisions immediately. If this episode gave you practical takeaways, don't wait. Subscribe to Trusted Talk on your favourite podcast platform and consider leaving a review to help other security professionals discover these essential insights. For even more urgent resources, like regulatory updates and automation tools, head over to GlobalSign.com. Join us next time as we tackle another pressing topic in digital identity and crypto agility. Until then, stay proactive, stay secure, and thank you for listening.